There's a simple 3-step formula you can follow to create your own designs like this, this, and this. And with this formula, you'll be able to create cards and fill up your planner or bullet journal or your own sketchbook. There are 3 examples to follow, so watch all 3 or just the ones you need. But let's take a closer look into this formula in the first example so that you can start to create your own beautiful floral designs. So grab some supplies that you might need and let's get started. For our first design, we're going to create a floral motif in the corner. And how we're going to start this is we're going to create a focal point. And we're going to balance this out by doing 1 main flower and 2 to 3 smaller flowers off to the side. When we do this, it creates a nice asymmetrical balance. And also when we place more flowers at the bottom, it can kind of create a heaviness to anchor the design. Now the next step is to create a frame for our design. And I do this by usually doing 2 large stems which stem outwards from that main motif. So you can see it here, I've got 1 going to the left and 1 going up. And this just creates a little bit more structure and interest for our design. Now for our last step, we need to fill the negative space. Now if you haven't heard the term negative space before, it's essentially the white space in between our main features of our design. So what I do to fill the negative space is to add leaves and stems and berries all around the main flowers, and this will fill up the white space in a beautiful way. And I'm going to use different shapes for the leaves and a variety of lengths with them as well to create more visual interest. And I'm also going to do the same thing with my stems and berries. So really try to use a variety of shapes and sizes while you're filling in the negative space of your design. So that's going to leave us with 1 main focal point and some stems which will create our frame, and then we filled in the rest of our design with leaves and stems and berries to fill in that negative space. So our next step after our plan is we're going to go in with our fine liner or your watercolors or whatever you're going to be using today, and we're going to be doing some outlining or adding some color depending on what you want to do with this. Now at this point, I actually didn't really plan what I was going to be doing for the actual flowers, but I always go to a daisy. That's just kind of where my brain goes to. So you just want to make a large flower. It doesn't really matter the type. It could be something elaborate like a peony or something simple like a daisy here. So I'm going to create my daisy and just start with the outline, and we'll go to the details a little bit later. And again with the leaf shapes, I'm just going to do some preliminary outlining, and all of the details I'll come back to later once everything is set on the page. And with some of the stems that are longer or have a straight-ish line, I know if you're like myself, it's kind of hard to do a straight line. But one tip that was given to me is don't necessarily move your wrist, but move your arm using your shoulder and your biceps. So if you move your arm across the page rather than relying on your wrist, you'll probably find you have a smoother, more straight line. So when it comes time to outline those large framing stems we've added in, try to move your arm across the page rather than relying on your wrist, and I think you'll have a lot more success with that. Now this framing stem that I've added in is a good example of creating some visual interest. So the one previous stem I used has shorter, more round, kind of fat leaves, where these ones are a lot more elongated. So having something a little bit unbalanced or asymmetrical can actually work in your favor. So don't try to perfect things and make everything so even and balanced. Sometimes it just looks really nice unbalanced. And like I said before, I didn't actually plan out which flowers I was going to add into this design, but I'm just going to create something really simple. So I'm going to do this rose, and it's not anything special. I'm just going to create something simple, and I'm also going to add 2 of these kind of wild rose inspired flowers, which just have 4 or 5 petals, and we're just going to keep those ones simple. So once I'm done with my outlining, I'm going to go in with my eraser and just go erase all of those pencil marks that I had before with my plan, just so I have a nice clean slate for the details, which will be coming up next. Now, there are a lot of ways to shade leaves and flowers, and if you feel like you need a little bit of help with it, I do have a couple other videos on the topic. I'll try to link the one on leaves right here. But you could shade half the leaf, you could practice some veining, you could do a couple of lines at the bottom, a couple lines at the top, as you see like I did earlier. There are so many different ways, and it's just individual style and preference. And not all shading techniques have to be realistic. So you can see what I'm doing here by just shading half of the leaf. Sometimes I just find that the contrast of doing this, creating some really dark areas in the design, is a really nice way to add interest again. So I'm going to speed things up here so you don't have to painstakingly watch me shade a million different lines, but you can follow along. And really my tip here is add contrast by creating a lot of lines, and that will add a lot of depth into your flowers and leaves. And again, the contrast looks really interesting in comparison to just plain white flowers, but it all depends what kind of look you're trying to create. I like the high contrast and adding a lot of shading in between the leaves, on the petals, all of that, but go play around and see what comes out of it. Oh, and one more tip that I have to add for you is any area that might be hidden, as you can see here, kind of underneath the daisy. I've created some really dark areas by doing some cross hatching, and I just use that very sparingly, but again, I feel like it adds a lot of depth and it makes a lot of things pop off the page. So you might, if you have any extra little white spaces, you might want to add a little bit of cross hatching and see if that helps your illustration come along. And I'm just going to finish up the last little bit of details on this last stem for the framing piece. And once you're all done, make sure you have no more pencil marks, and voila! Now on to the next design, which is more of a balanced design. So we have one in the corner and one in the opposite corner, framing in your card or your bullet journal, whatever it is you are creating today. So for this balanced design, we're going to be following the same formula that we did for example 1, but this time we have 2 floral motifs. So we'll have one in each corner, and we're going to do the exact same thing. So we're going to start by framing it out, and we will create that focal flower in the middle, and then again adding 2 or 3 smaller flowers, and that will kind of create the balance that we are wanting. And once we've done a placement for where our flowers are going to be, we're going to have 1 stem, this time not 2, although you could do 2 depending on preference, but 1 stem that creates that structure and creates that imaginary frame. So we'll do 1 going up and 1 going down. Once we have all of this in place, we can start to think about what flowers we're going to use, and also start to think about how we're going to use up that white space or that negative space. So what kind of leaves do you want to use? What kind of other stems or berries do you want to use? This is where you're going to get creative and kind of play around with your pencil first before you put pen or paint to paper. So now that I have finished my plan, I'm going to start to go in with my highlighter, and I'm going to create this little fern here. And this is going to be on my 1 floral motif, the framing piece for it. So I'll have one of these and I'll have another one that's very similar looking on the second floral motif up in the other corner. I'm also going to be working a little bit backwards. I feel like you kind of should start with the focal flower and doing that one first, but I am just going to work from top to bottom mostly for this one. So I'm going to start framing out those leaves to create more interest in that white or negative space. And I'm going to just kind of go along and frame everything out. And then I'll go back in later for all of those details. I also decided I wanted a poppy for my focal flower for this design. So I really like these because they're very loose, they're very fluttery, and I just find them beautiful. If you have any trouble though creating these fluttery petals that kind of can flop around a little bit, I also have another video on how to create this particular one, the California poppy. I will go and link it right here. And I am also creating kind of like these, again, wild rose inspired 4 or 5 petal flowers. They don't have to be a real flower, you can just make them up. This is your art practice and you can do whatever you want, whatever makes you happy. So I've added a couple more leaves and a couple more sprigs and berries, and I'm happy with it. So I'm just going to erase all of those pencil lines and then go in with my fine liner to do some more detailed work. But once again, I'm going to speed things up here so you don't have to painstakingly watch me do about 10,000 different little lines, and I'll speed that up here. So I'm actually going to go in like my last example, and I'm going to create some darker areas where the petals meet, or where there would be natural darkness underneath the leaves or petals. And this actually has an official name. It's called ambient occlusion. But when you add these into your illustrations, it adds a lot of depth to the leaves and flowers and the illustration as a whole. So I highly recommend including it by adding a couple of extra lines where petals meet, or doing some cross hatching where it would be an appropriate place for darkness to be. Now we're going to get started on our second floral motif for this design, and I'm going to create a similar fern to the one that we had created before, and that will just create some balance. And before we get going on any of the florals, I have a tip for you. Get your card, get your paper, whatever you're doing, and flip it around. Otherwise, you're going to be working upside down, and it's just a little bit hard for your brain, my brain, to compute. So I found this really helpful to flip it around, and then we're working right way up again. And I'm going to grab my fine liner, and I'm just going to start to work on those florals now. So I'm going to create a very basic rose and a very basic 6-petal flower. And after I've done that, I'll just start to fill out the negative space with my berries and my leaves. Now once I have everything all outlined, I'm going to flip my page around again and just erase all of those pencil lines and those plants from before, and then I can start to go in with the details now that I have everything totally set out. Now, as for the detail work, I find it quite meditative to do myself, but watching it I think can maybe be a bit tedious for some. So if you'd like to follow along for all the details, please do. But if this part isn't for you, you can skip ahead to about a minute or two to 16:32. Okay, our balanced floral design is now finished. So you can leave it as is, or you can add an extra frame right here or up at the top as well. And you can start to use this for your cards and create something beautiful in the center or what have you. Next up is our circular floral design, which will be our last one for this video. And I love this one because of the peony, but I also think circles and everything in that kind of design shape is very trendy right now. But let's get started with our plan. So we're going to follow the same formula. We're going to create one main flower and 2 to 3 smaller flowers. So for this one, I have a very clear vision in mind. I wanted to have a peony and I wanted to have 2 of the wild roses on either side. And this one's not going to have as many leaves and stems, but this one is going to be very balanced. So I already have my plan because this one's a little bit more simple, and I'm going to get going with my fine liner. So if you need any help creating a peony, there's lots of really great tutorials out there. I'll link the one that I have right here, and hopefully you find it helpful if you do need it. But peonies can be a little bit complicated because there are so many layers to them and there's so much movement within this flower, but they can be really beautiful once you get used to drawing them. Next, I'm going to start on my wild rose. I'm going to have one here and then one on the other side as well. This is a very balanced design. And I'm going to keep my pen stroke very light, and wobbly is good. As for the framing stems, these ones are going to be very simple, and I'm just going to create a couple of leaves here. And once I'm done that, I'm going to create these floating leaves. I know they don't really make a ton of sense, they're not attached to anything, but it really works well with the design. So what I did on the top, I'm going to recreate down on the bottom, and they are almost identical as one could get. And again, I'm going to create those floating leaves and some of those open dots as well. Now, once you're happy with your design, go ahead and erase those pencil marks. And we're going to go in with our fine liner to do some more detailed work. So like before, if you find it helpful to follow on, please do so. But if this detailed work is not for you, you can just do it on your own. You can skip to 2202 and I will meet you over there when you are ready. Okay, and our circle design is complete. You can leave it as is, or if you'd like to add a little bit more, you can create this circle here to kind of close off the design, and you can add whatever you want on the inside, of course, depending on what exactly you are creating today. Alright friends, that's the end of our 3 examples. If you found any of these helpful, please make sure you hit that like button. It helps small creators like myself really branch out and have our videos seen by more people. And if you would like some more ideas on flowers or leaves to use in your designs, you can watch one of these videos right here. And thank you so much for watching as always.